The primary purpose of Uniquely Human, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with each individual or family for specific guidance.
Uniquely Human, the podcast, is produced by Elevated Studio. Music is graciously provided by Matt Savage of Savage Records.
Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Prezant, clinical scholar, researcher, and consultant on autism and neurodiversity, and a Brooklyn boy raised in the big city.
And I'm Dave. I'm none of those things, and I grew up on a farm in Illinois. But being on the spectrum myself, I have plenty of personal insight to lend.
And this is Uniquely Human, the podcast, a show that illuminates and celebrates autism and neurodiversity. Today, we're just so pleased to have Christine Jenkins on with us. Actually, Christine and I have been corresponding for some time, especially around her interest in echolalia and what she refers to as tuning. But we're going to approach a very, very different topic today, and that's more recent immersion of Christine's interest in aging and kind of lifespan development. So, Christine, welcome to Uniquely Human, the podcast.
Thanks very much, Barry and David. I'm in Ottawa, Canada, so it's pretty well straight north of Syracuse, New York, I guess.
Yeah.
And enjoying life here as an older adult. I'm 63. I was diagnosed at 48, well, self-diagnosed, and then I got confirmation in another year later. So around 2009, I had the paperwork. And I've been an advocate probably really actively since 2013. I helped run a conference here in Ottawa called Asper Femme. And we had Rudy Simone and a panel of autistic adults and talked about being a female on the spectrum.
And you're also the co-author of a wonderful anthology, Spectrum
Yep.
Women, Walking to the Beat of Autism.
Nice.
And you do present in Canada and internationally. I'm just kind of giving our listeners a little bit more about you that you shared. And you've been a peer reviewer for the journal Autism in Adulthood and involved in editing other books. And as you've shared, Christine says, my aim is to help include autistic voices at every stage in true co-production of research. And you have your own business, Christine Jenkins Awesome Consulting. You're doing a lot of things.
Yeah, I wear many hats. Most of them don't pay, but I enjoy what I do. That's the story of our lives. I think we're very multidimensional. Some of us have very fixated interests, but I tend to morph every few years. I ran a tea store for a few years, so I was a tea guru. I was a DJ, like I said, for 21 years. I was a part-time DJ.
Oh my goodness.
Just so many interests. And sometimes you let them go. So my house is full of different collections of things from various pastimes. And sometimes you do come back to them. So that's why I'm terribly afraid to let go of stuff, because I might go back to that hobby later and then I'll really regret giving everything away. I was a biker.
Yeah.
My ex-husband was a Harley Davidson rider. So yeah, I'd love to talk about the relationship angles with David. Because
Absolutely.
You and Kristen have that thing going on. So that's really cool. And I read your book, of course, read both of your books.
Good.
And
Thank you.
Not that I could identify as the female part of the couple, because right, that's been really sorely missing. We're starting to get more accounts now. Sarah Hendricks, for instance, writes about, but I mean, when she met her husband, he wasn't officially diagnosed, and she got diagnosed many years later. So she didn't even know she was autistic. So that, they were drawn together, and that's really cool. but there aren't too many female neurodivergent, male neurotypical resources. I'd love to see
No,
that.
not certainly nothing published and widely available mainstream kind of things. But the good thing is I'm starting to see a number of couples where that is the case. And I've noticed a theme emerging, and maybe it's just the couples that I'm meeting, because this can't be true for every couple, I know that, but a theme that I'm emerging, which seems very positive, is that the neurotypical male partners all seem to be very supportive and very almost nurturing of their female partner who is neurodivergent. So if I'm observing this correctly, that would be a really cool phenomenon and a cool trend in these relationships, because so often, women are dismissed across the board in so many different settings, that to have a partner who is actually supportive of you, who understands the diagnosis, who understands your challenges, limitations. And some of it sometimes is because an autistic woman can be an excellent partner for a neurotypical guy. And hear me out on this, is because the autistic partner might not love all the social things that quote unquote, neurotypical wives might love to do. And so the husbands get this partner who's like, yeah, I don't want to go to that wine tasting. The fact that these male partners are being so supportive that I'm observing, is really encouraging to me.
Yeah, and I don't think we tend to be drawn to the alpha male. I find in a heterosexual context, of course, they tend to be the beta or the omega male, the kinder, gentler.
Okay.
Because we're
That's
so sensitive and we're so overwhelmed, I think that it has to be a partner who's quite laid back. Otherwise, we're going to be triggered all the time in our sensory
This is
realm.
what
So
you just put words to what I have seen, observed. That's really an interesting observation.
now I'm sure in
Cool.
other cultures it might be different. I wouldn't want to generalize, but the white couples that I see, they tend to be very understanding. You're right. The guys are really sweet.
Awesome.
But they're not the manly men. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, Christine, other than the fact that we are all aging, what has kind of attracted you to the topic of aging, and you saying to me that's really what you want to focus on?
Well, when I encountered Cos Michael, who's an aging researcher in the UK, she had this sort of manifesto around 2015 at the National Autistic Society. And all her points were so well taken. And I thought, no, nobody's looking at this. And I found it really frustrating that we didn't know what to look forward to, because there are things to look forward to. And so I went there in 2019 to Edinburgh and gave a talk called Aging Disgracefully. And she wasn't there, but I dedicated it to her. And a mother did fill in the the feedback form that you get later on, and you can talk about it. She said, Christine's talk was not really relevant to me, but I know that down the line, my daughter is going to need this kind of information because she will age. So even though it immediately didn't resonate with her, she was happy that she'd come to hear my talk. So that was really gratifying. I thought, well, I'm going in the right direction. And then I decided to specialize in menopause as part of aging, because it doesn't have to be a terrible experience, but when you don't know what's going to happen to you, I mean, it's half the people in the world are going to go through it. So that's been my more recent effort. But aging is sort of the umbrella over all the things that I look into.
I find that with every year, I get better and better at getting old. It seems to overcome me.
Yeah.
And if I can give some props to a brand new book by my friend Sarah Douglas, and, well, I don't know if it's going to show up because I've blurred everything. Anyway, I can send you the link after. Felicity Sedgwick is the researcher, but Sarah is the lived experience, and it's amazing. So understanding autistic relationships across the lifespan family, friends, lovers, and others. So that'll appeal to David. And chapter 8 is called Getting Older. And I'm actually named, and so is my British co-researcher, Rose Matthews. So we're really happy, to get a few pages, a page and a half on menopause. It's a start, and this is how we, the squeaky wheel is going to get the grease. So we're just going to have to keep putting this on the agenda. I stand up at INSAR and I ask Mark Stokes embarrassing questions. If you don't get out there and tell people this is what I want to find out about, then nobody's going to put the money. We know that only 2% of all funding in the US at the NIH that goes to adult research.
Yes.
And by that I mean, post 25, because we need help getting young people launched and out into the community and doing something that they find fulfilling. But after about 25, you don't see a lot of stats, and certainly not after 40.
Yes.
So I was part of a local initiative, and I asked them to do the breakdown, the whole population, and then 40 plus, we took out the data and looked at it specifically. And that was really interesting because the quality of life was going up, which not every study shows. They show cognitive decline. It's very depressing. And some of the new papers that I'm going to send to you, especially the work of Gavin Stewart, Catherine Crompton, Felicity Sedgwick. There's just so many interesting things going on, but they're mostly in the UK. I'd like to see more in Canada and the US on the aging perspective.
So about your point that quality of life actually improves, according to some of the research, one of the things that I've observed through my neurotypical eyes, and I've actually discussed this with my wife, who's a psychologist, and she's neurotypical as well, is that our friends on the spectrum in many ways have developed greater insight into themselves than neurotypical people have, because they've spent so much time examining, for example, what are the triggers? How do I deal with it? Now, obviously, I'm not saying for all autistic people, but are you finding, or do you have any comments to add to that about in the aging process that autistic people very often are putting a lot of energy into trying to understand themselves?
Well, I was accused of being self-centered, but I prefer to call it self-aware because I had to do my own research to find what was going to work for me. And I did get another diagnosis of sensory processing disorder a few years after my autism one. And that helped because we looked at the hypo and hyper profiles of all the senses. And so more what's going to trigger you or set you off. And you can make plans. For instance, if I've got 2 or 3 webinars like this on a day, I'm going to take the next day off. I'm just not going to apologize for that. David, right. I'm sure you pace yourself as well when you have social obligations.
I have learned to, yes. And that's part of the beauty of aging, is after a while, you start to realize which mistakes you don't want to repeat.
Yeah, and if you've got kids, which I don't, but if you're watching your kids meltdown and you're going, okay, we could have done that a little differently, you gain wisdom and insight into your own set of traits because obviously you're genetically linked, so it must be interesting. I missed out on that, but that must be quite fascinating for the parents to see, and even discover that they may be on the spectrum themselves. We have a lot of women who are walking around either misdiagnosed with bipolar, borderline personality disorder, anxiety disorder. There's a huge long list. And of course, when they come up with the autism diagnosis, then they blame everything on the autism. So sometimes that backfires. So, right. I'm sure you've seen it in the couples you've worked with, but that's just his autism. I don't think it's not like a get out of jail free card, right? I mean, you wrote about that in your book. It doesn't give you the license to be an idiot. So
no, it doesn't. There's a very clear delineation between what's an Asperger's, we'll say, challenge, and what's just being a lazy, irresponsible person in a relationship. And some of the things that we dealt with and couples deal with are Asperger's or autism. And a lot of things were just me learning the skills of being in a healthy relationship. And but you're right, like so many women that we see do get misdiagnosed, inadequately diagnosed, or late diagnosis. So
Yeah.
And in my support group, we even have grandmothers. You know, it wasn't until that little boy came along and they do the family genome, you know, the diagram, and oh yeah, there's great aunt so and so, and then there's you, and like the penny drops. It's like 70 years of their lives. Can you imagine? I mean, I felt old at 48 finding out, but I've got people that I deal with that are way up in their 60s and 70s. So
oh yeah.
it's really traumatic when you realize that you need to look at your whole life through a new lens.
Yeah, Christine, you're anticipating my next question. and that is, and this might be purely on an anecdotal basis, but we just tend to talk about late diagnosed autistic people, but we don't break that down in terms of some people say, oh, I'm late diagnosed autistic. I was diagnosed at 29, and now you're talking about people in their 50s and 60s. Are there any patterns that you've observed? I know every person's an individual, of course, but there would seem to be, you know, different kinds of stressors and coming to understand yourself if you're diagnosed at 28 or 29 as opposed to 55.
Right. Well, you've got a lot more to regret at 55, things that you would have done differently. So that's where the grieving comes in. I don't think the young adults have as much to grieve because they haven't lived as long. But if you've had broken relationships, maybe, you know, even surrendered your children because you weren't managing them, there's a lot of accusations, you know, by the social services and stuff, in England especially. They've had this FII, which is fabricated and induced illness. Some of the mums get blamed for that. And, you know, this mom shaming has to stop. It just has to stop. You know, if you're doing everything you can for your kid and you're going to these parent meetings and you're trying to get accommodations for your children, and then they tell you that you're making it up, that must be really painful. I can't imagine. So in some ways, I dodged all of that. But now that we're in this older group together, we can share pretty frankly. And I find the internet is a safer place. Some of these private groups are really good outlets. And I hate it when people say, oh, you can't have true friends on the internet. It's like, you don't know how much I've come to lean on some of these ladies. They've been just there for me. So to disparage the use of the web, you know, just because maybe neurotypical people prefer meeting face to face, that's fine for them. But I can only take a limited amount of socializing. So they are my true friends. And I hope they're listening.
It's, you know, when you talk about social media and just connecting on the internet, connecting virtually, it's how those relationships develop and what the connections are about. You just can't say, oh, it's just all bad stuff. It's not a true relationship.
Yeah, and it's hard to find each other at first because you're not sure if you can trust the group. Some of them have gone down in flames and people have infiltrated who aren't necessarily with the highest goals and have sown seeds of dissension. And some groups are no longer in existence. So it's really hard. We have to be, you know, as a moderator, I have to vet people when they come in and make sure they realize it's a safe haven for these people.
You know, given that I think we would all agree that diagnosis is really important in terms of a person being able to understand, you know, how they're reacting and what's going on in their lives. But we know, and we hear this over and over again, how difficult it is, especially for women,
Yeah,
to
it's
get a
the
diagnosis.
list of restrictive and rigid behaviors, which is part of the DSM-5 criteria. They're mostly boy things, lining up toys in a row. And like if I said that I read all the Anne of Green Gables books 3 times over, that wouldn't be considered odd because that's a girl thing. And girls like their books, and the characters in the books are their friends. But that's a repetitive behavior. But it wouldn't be signaled as such by a clinician. So we're trying to come up with non-DSM lists that aren't just behavioral, like external behavior, because most of us are internalizers. That's why I don't say female autism or male autism, because I think from Dina Gassner, I learned to call it externalizing and internalizing presentation. And I feel much more comfortable with that because many men read Spectrum Women and they loved it because they're the kinder, gentler kind of guy. And they just resonated with it. So we got some really good reviews from guys. So just to say that RRB list is really problematic. And like my special interest is probably the study of autism. But for guys, it might be computers or manga or video games, right? I mean, there are differences that they tend towards. And Rachel Grove did a great study in Australia, and she did a bar chart, and you see the different interests across the bottom, and the male, female. It was shocking. So psychology is a big one for women. A lot of us go into psychology because we're drawn to helping people. And you know that Mary Doherty has that group, Autistic Doctors International.
Yes.
She's got hundreds of people. Not all of them are out of the closet, but they're starting to affiliate with her because they need the medical community to realize that we can be very good medical professionals because of our attention to detail, as long as we're, in an environment that we can flourish in. So maybe that's why I was drawn back to research. After 40 years away from campus, it was the last thing that I didn't realize that I would find such a warm welcome again in the research community. So it's never too late. I think that's what you have to realize as an older autistic adult, that it's better late than never. You really can't start this too late. So I'm making up for lost time. I feel like the first 5 decades were like a blur, and now I'm coming into myself and realizing what I have to offer. Not that we have to be productive to be human. I think that's a slippery slope too. I call it the productivity myth, that in order to earn a place on the planet, you have to be putting out all the time. There are some people that are just never going to. And I support the rights of people with higher needs because of that. And I think the neurodiversity paradigm gets a bad name because they say, oh, you only want to help the people with lower needs. I don't think that's true. From what I see, I'm advocating for non-speakers. I'm advocating for people that need support 2 or 3 times a day coming into their residence. There are all kinds of needs that need to be met. And I have meltdowns. I still have, my really bad days too. I just, women learn to mask more because they're expected to put on a facade. But there's a cost to that, and that can be really destructive. I'm sure David's seen it in his practice because, one person in the couple might be trying to prop up the other one and doesn't always succeed. So, and what if I had known when I was married?
Well, there's also
I needed a counselor like David.
No, I'm the farthest thing from a counselor. In fact, I've told many people that this relationship won't work out, and you should probably get your affairs in order and split up. But I would say that the most important thing that comes with the diagnosis, and I think this has to do with relationships and with aging and quality of life in general. Geez, sorry. I guess it's my internet, but the thing with, actually, I'm going to turn off my video. That might help.
Yeah, we just need the audio.
Yeah. So the most important thing that happens with the diagnosis is what we do with that information. Just the diagnosis doesn't do anything for a person except make certain services available through insurance, right? So what we do with the information, do we choose to look at it as a user manual or blueprint for our own mind and our behaviors and things like that, or do we like you said earlier, try to use it as a get out of jail free card, which, that's kind of taking the victim approach, where it's like, oh, I'm just a victim of my circumstance. And I don't think any relationship is going to be successful when one person embraces a victim mindset,
Yeah, and with intersectionality now, I have started to call it competitive victimhood, because we have, class, race, gender, age,
Mm,
and age isn't usually part of that debate, by the way. So I have a hashtag, my intersectionality includes age.
right. Hmm.
Uh, but, we're trying to one up each other in our level of victimhood. Where does that get us? It just causes division. So I think we need to
Mm-hmm.
raise the tone of the discussion, and try and elevate this to a more civil discourse. It's gotten really bitter lately, and I don't like that. It's really painful. And some
Yeah.
of my advocate friends have been attacked quite viciously online. So
Hmm. So,
I'm not
Christina,
that prominent. I don't get the attacks that they do, because I'm not really out there like they are.
That's
no,
good.
They're taking one for the team. It's like, no, they shouldn't have to. It's not fair that they're the lightning rod and everybody's, what do they call it when they gang up online? Dogpiling. Ugh,
oh,
just,
never heard
Yeah.
that.
yeah,
My goodness.
nasty.
Uh, so, Christine, I want to ask you a question because I know this is a challenge amongst neurotypicals who have either friends, maybe not diagnosed. And the challenge is if you feel strongly that a person is on the spectrum, and now let's put it in the context of women, do you say to them, hey, I think you're on the spectrum. I think you're autistic. Maybe you should follow up on that. I know a lot of neurotypicals say, I don't feel comfortable saying that.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
wrong.
pretty shy, so I don't know. I mean, I might suggest a quiz or something that they could take, but I wouldn't want to be walking around. I mean, I do have OTDAR or ADAR. Sometimes you realize the person you're, oh yeah, it goes off.
Adar, I love that.
I never
Yeah,
heard that before.
there you go. A
Ah.
new word. Uh, but I guess you don't want to jeopardize the friendship,
Yeah.
and but if it's like their grandchild, I have talked to people and said, the acorn doesn't fall too far from the tree.
Mhm.
So if it's a direct relative that's getting assessed, then I might venture.
Yeah.
But you
Uh,
have to count the cost of perhaps bruising or irreparably damaging the relationship
yes. And then again, of course, it depends upon where that person is. So
in
it's
their
not
journey.
uncommon for me, mostly with dads, but if I'm doing a school consultation and a dad says, after I do the observation, we get together with the family and says, well, I was a lot like that when I was young. Sometimes I wonder if I'm on the spectrum. So that opens the door for a
Hmm.
discussion.
Well, it
Um,
happened when I brought the movie Seeing the Unseen, which is an Icelandic production.
hmm,
I held the premiere in Canada at Carleton University, and a lot of things in my life changed because of that night. Just hearing about the movie, I showed the trailer in Edinburgh, and then we formed an interdepartmental committee at Carleton to put on the movie. Like they got a budget and everything. I wasn't expecting anything so elaborate. They wrote up the panel discussion that we had following the movie. We had question and answer, and people were coming up to us going, I think that's my mother, or that's my aunt, or my older sister. So, yeah, it really had a deep effect on people. Even the projectionist who was up in the booth, and we never even met her that night. She went to one of the organizers that we had peer counselors in case anybody was triggered
hmm,
by watching the movie because it was very emotional. It's on Vimeo. You can
that's
still rent it.
important. Hmm.
And so Margaret got all these counselors together, and I think she heard back from the projectionist that she was going to go and seek an assessment. So you never know. And that committee is where I met Professor Brady, who's now my lead investigator on the menopause work, because she said, well, what should we study? If you could get money to do anything, what would it be? And I said, menopause, right away. because nobody was looking at it. Well, we found a couple people after that, but we didn't think anybody else was investigating the change of life. And if you think everything was working fine until into your 30s, and then the hormones start acting up again, we call it puberty in reverse, right? So yes, there's a terrible arc around 12, 13. Some of the families notice that their children are maybe acting out more or whatever, just in the neurotypical world, but certainly the autistic community. And that's usually when a lot of girls get diagnosed, 12, 13, 14. So I thought it was really interesting that the solutions that had been cobbled together in the 20s and maybe, the young married life and the early years of having children, all of a sudden these women were coming unglued. So we don't know if it's autism or if it's menopause. So that's what our research is trying to untangle. It's very interesting.
Well,
that's going to help the generations. It's not going to help me. I'm 63. I'm long through it, but it's going to help the women coming up behind me and non-binary. And, there's so many people who don't understand because the medical community is not giving out enough information. They may not even get enough training in med school. So we have to go back up the pipeline and see where the problem is. And we should have something coming out this fall. So the timing is good for this. Just keep visiting our website, which is very easy, autisticmenopause.com. And you can see where we're at in the process. So,
Christine, what you're saying is exciting to me in a sense, because I'm a developmentalist and I've always been a developmentalist. And the difference around menopause, is around some of the same issues that we see when we look at the behavior of young kids and just look at snapshots of the behavior and pathologize that. As opposed
why do we have to all the time? Yeah.
Right, as opposed to looking and understanding stages of development. So I would imagine that, as you said, some women may get diagnosed around menopause with the hormonal changes, but initially it might be looked at through the lens of pathology as opposed to the lens of a life developmental change.
I mean, menopause is a natural process. It's not an illness. It's not a disease. But just like autism, it has coexisting conditions that need to be treated. But in itself can be a very productive, positive time when you come out. They call it second spring. So, this old hag crone thing that, you're all dried up and your life has no use now, that's built into the reproductive health system. And in fact, I won't answer surveys anymore that talk about reproductive health because I'm post-reproductive. And some of us were never reproductive because of, polycystic ovary syndrome, for instance. We never could have conceived, or endometriosis, which I also had. So I don't even know now if I was fertile. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. I can't go back there in my mind thinking, what would I have done differently if I'd known I had endo? But there's the poor body awareness, all those symptoms that I missed because of poor interoception, which I deal with Kelly Mahler about all the time. You don't know what normal pain is. So you don't get it treated. You don't even think about it. So it was a gynecologist that found it. And, I had endo for 30 years. Who knew? So rather than regret that, I can do something about it now.
Yes.
Right. And other women have EDS or hypermobility. That factors into their autism. It's certainly part of their sensory profile.
Can you describe EDS, hypermobility?
Not really. I don't have it. It's a joint condition, connective tissue. People that can bend their fingers really weird ways, and their joints come out of. Yeah, that's part of.
Okay.
But you can also, I might have a kind that's not hypermobile. There are several different kinds.
Yeah. So we growing up,
the kids who used to do stunts growing up, and but it's really painful when it comes out of alignment, and you can't get to a therapist to fix it. It's
well, as you get older, those connective tissues. Yeah, connective tissues and joints and things become your nemesis as we age, which I'm learning.
Hmm. But curing the endo, I mean, I was 54, I think, when they finally zapped me and got everything back to the way it should be. I was so grateful. I had to wait a long time, but when they did it right. Now, of course, we have Medicare here, so, you know, not having to pay is a huge boon. So I was very relieved that I got that medical care, but it was way too long to wait. So I think there's a lot of gaslighting in the medical profession, and oh, the little woman shouldn't worry your head. We're dealing with that right now with mammograms, trying to get them lowered to 40, because in the US you just had an announcement that every woman should start getting them at 40, because we're seeing young ladies, in their 30s, and the longer you wait, the more advanced it is. So I try to throw my influence behind these campaigns to bring more attention to that gaslighting that's going on.
That's important work you're doing. My goodness.
And
So
there's
let
gaslighting in autism too, because of the typical male stereotype. We can't avoid that. It's usually white, young males that are
mhm.
the picture. If you look through brochures, or you just type in autism into Google Images and see what comes up, it's quite shocking.
Oh
How
yeah.
few people of color, how few older people, and how few women in general.
Uh,
So we got to do
yeah,
something about that stereotype.
Christine, to address that, a little kind of self-indulgent plug here for the second edition of Uniquely Human. We put a small African American girl on the cover. And I was told that by having a small Black girl on the cover, it was groundbreaking, that it was probably the first book that had, at that time, that had a young child of color who was female representing a young autistic person. So, yes, we have to turn that around. So important.
Mm.
So let's
Well,
talk a
we've
little.
we've actually commissioned some artwork for our website, so you can
Mhm.
go have a look at some of the. Uh, we paid artists to develop logos and stuff for us, so I really like that, the creative part of it, because
Mhm.
the women are taking back their power,
Yes.
and that's really important. They feel not only invisible but ignored,
Hmm.
because they're bucking this trend, which is the 4-to-1 ratio, which is garbage. It's
Right.
just those people aren't diagnosed yet. And Isabel Aino in Montreal, who's my specialist, she believes that it's closer to 1-to-1 once you get into mature adulthood. She's seeing people in their 80s.
Mm.
I cannot believe that. Like, why would you? Well, of course, it's up to them. But you almost would think, why would you bother getting a label once you're a senior citizen? But
Hmm.
it's worth it to these people. They feel validated. They feel liberated. They're free of their past misconceptions about being
Hmm.
broken individuals. And I don't think it's ever too late. But
Hmm.
we have to pay for it. We don't get psychiatry necessarily here for free. So
Hmm.
you're talking 2,000-3,000 Canadian dollars to get a diagnosis.
So, Christine, in terms of support, are, I guess, older autistic people in general, but more specifically, autistic women, um, connecting with each other? Are
Yeah,
there
yeah, we're
specialized support
connecting.
groups? Yep.
Yeah, I run two, but I
Hmm.
just don't advertise them. That people come to me and I, let them know where to find us. Um, a lot of them have been mixed groups in the past. I don't feel as safe there.
Hmm.
I hate to say it, but
What do you mean by mixed groups?
male and
Gender?
female.
Gender. Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
gender mixed. Um, I mean, I think we have a couple of trans men, but it's mostly non-binary and female. So, and the menopause one, there is no lower age limit, but the personal group that I'm in, we have a cutoff of 1975, because we want the mature people to be aging together, aging well together. Maybe that's a better way to put it. Um, there just doesn't seem to be much out there for them. So, and we're not into dating groups or, because there are apps and things that you can use and
Hmm.
connect with people, but we've sort of been there and done that. So most of the women are either single or they're in stable relationships. So they're not really looking. Heck, if someone came along, that would be great, but they're not going to find me in that group. So,
So
and we
get
share articles, we share memes that are uplifting and funny, and it's been very gratifying. I think we're coming up to 5 years.
Hmm.
We started in 2018. But the menopause one is much more the younger cohort because they're in their late 30s and they're starting to wonder if these particular symptoms that they have are perimenopause or not. So they're asking questions like that in the group. And of course, everybody wants to make money off us right now. There's all sorts of vitamins and supplements and techniques.
oh
And,
goodness, yeah.
it's really getting to be a pain trying to weed out. So we always say, no, we're not giving medical advice here. Go do your homework, talk to your doctor or your gynecologist. And, because as soon as we start advocating for some treatment, it becomes more pseudoscience. And I don't want to go down that road. So.
Hmm. So you
But
had
I
met.
think it's a small, intimate group, and I think
Mhm.
that's what they want. If we were suddenly flooded with, hundreds of applicants, I don't know if we could cope because they have to be brought up to speed. It's like, okay, you're an older woman on the spectrum. This is probably you've dealt with some of these things in your past, and now you're trying to live an authentic, fulfilled life. And that's what I think we all deserve.
Mhm. So you mentioned earlier in our discussion that some research is indicating, thankfully, that quality of life actually can improve in the older years.
Yeah.
What are some of the factors, again, even if it's anecdotal, that you've observed where quality of life does improve for an individual? What seems to be going into that mix to improve
I
quality
think
of life?
the housing can become more stable. Um, just personal safety. You know who you are and what kind of relationships you're going to settle for or not settle for. Um, Financial security. I mean, I was lucky enough through the divorce to get a settlement. Not everybody has that privilege. So I guess it depends where you live in the world, whether you're going to have a stable lifestyle or not. And then these friends online, I think we can't dismiss the level of autistic communication. And there's studies now that show that autistics may not get along with neurotypicals extremely well, but the autistic to autistic communication can actually be quite successful. So that's starting to be published more. And then there's Damian Milton with his double empathy philosophy that it takes the neurotypicals effort as well to understand us, not just us doing 95% of the effort, which is what I was taught. I was into the fawn mode, the people pleasing, and I thought that I was the one who was at fault all the time, and I had to do all the remedying of the broken relationship, trying to put things back together. But that's extremely damaging, it causes trauma to some people. So that I've let go, that whole illusion. And I think that's how you avoid the meltdowns and the shutdowns is by factoring in what works for you and surrounding yourself with people that you can have wholesome relationships with, whether they're platonic or not. I think it's really important that, for years my friends picked me. And I guess I've come to the point where now I'm picking them
Mhm.
because I have more agency, more autonomy, maybe. And yeah, can't afford to waste time on people that are toxic in my life. So
Mhm.
Yeah, and there's never a time when it's too late to have autonomy and agency. I mean, there's times when it's far more beneficial to have it, but
well, that's why I'm not a
it's
big
not.
fan of social skills because I think they're trying to ram us into, put the square peg in the round hole. It just doesn't work for everyone. I like playing alone. And like I played on the
Yeah.
piano for hours as a kid. That was how I didn't know it. I was self-regulating at the piano.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
and I would sing my little songs, and if somebody came in, I would stop. Like, I was really um, quite withdrawn and shy. But if you listened closely, you could tell what mood I was in from the songs. If I sang
Hmm.
Hello Goodbye by Lennon and McCartney, I was desiring connection, right? You say goodbye, I say hello. Why
Uh,
why are we not getting together? And The Fool on the Hill. There's so many
yeah.
things, yeah, that I was speaking from my heart, but nobody heard. Because
Hmm.
you're in a
Yeah.
busy household and everybody's yelling at everyone, and we all scream to make ourselves heard. Uh, you know, but music was my language. That was the way that I came out into the world. So
Hmm.
probably from 3 or 4, I just played by ear. And you see these kids that are really gifted that can play like concertos and stuff. Well, I wasn't like that, but I could pick things
Mhm.
off the radio, and that was the only time I was popular at parties. Was, well, Chris will play that, and I could pick
Yeah.
off the latest hit from the radio and plunk
Hmm.
it down on the piano.
So you're opening
So
up the door to our first discussions years ago
exactly.
about tuning and echolalia.
Yeah.
Go for it. Tell
Yeah,
us.
I feel echolalia gets pathologized. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think that child is reaching out,
Hmm.
and whether it's a TV script or passage in a book or a comic, you know,
Hmm.
we all remember lines from things. In my day, it was Happy Days, with Fonzie and Richie, and you go to school the next day and everybody would be talking about that episode. Um, and I try to be cool and use the phrases, right? Sometimes it would totally backfire. But
Yeah.
with singing, I don't know, it seems to draw people in. And, some of the polyvagal theory is that humming and that really helps regulate your core or whatever's going on there in the nervous system.
Hmm.
Um, I was doing that subconsciously, I guess, all my life, and I've always got a song going in my head.
Hmm.
Like I'll wake up and I'm singing something in my head. So that's why I call it tuning, because it isn't necessarily out loud. It can be private, or I can go and sit at the piano and my mom used to call it diddling around. She wanted me to practice my classical pieces, when I did start taking lessons. But I would always end up turning it into something else. So, but she'd say, "Why am I putting money into these lessons? You're not practicing." But I learned so much that I used in my voice teaching career, because sometimes the student needed the song shifted up or down, right? Because they had a cold that day or their period. It does affect the voice. And I'm one of the few people who can just do that. Okay, let's put it in B flat instead of C. Um, wasn't a big deal. And I told them, you realize people pay good money for this, like New York City auditions. You can't just go in and say, I want you to play this in another key and play it anyway. But I think that's called a splinter skill. It's not a savant ability, but um, being able to hear things like that very acutely. I see it as a gift. I don't see it as something that I deserved, but doesn't always come in handy if you're in an orchestral performance and there's one instrument that's out. I don't know
Hmm.
about you, David, but it's all I hear all night is that person. I can
Oh
probably
man.
pinpoint who it is, right? It really ruins the presentation when you go, oh gosh, I wish that they'd go out in the wings and tune and come back. Like, it's really annoying. So
Yeah. Yep.
that's the mixed blessing of perfect pitch. So absolute,
Yeah.
I think we call it
Yes.
absolute pitch. But how many autistic people have that? Maybe 10, 15% of us. And it's pretty high. And in the regular population, I think it's 1 in 10,000. If you
Hmm.
read This Is Your Brain on Music by
Oh,
Daniel
interesting.
Levitin, he wrote like 10 pages on perfect pitch. You know what struck me when I read them was like, You mean not everybody hears like this?
Yeah.
Oh, what a shame. No, I thought everybody was like me, right? But you don't know that you're atypical until you read someone explaining what absolute pitch is. So, yeah, that was a wake-up call. I've actually written to him a couple of times, so, because he has a lab in Montreal.
Hmm. Well,
Got to pay your own way.
a very common question that I get from parents of very young kids, this just happened a couple of times in the last few weeks, is why does my son or daughter begin to have a meltdown when I try to sing her favorite songs to her?
Okay, you got to sing in the right key
Yes.
every time. Okay? If it's Frère Jacques, it has to be in C major.
That's
Okay?
right.
Like you have to repeat that because there's a theory that we're all born with perfect pitch and we lose it by 4 or 5 years of age. So if
Interesting.
you are retaining that tonality, here I'm getting my voice teacher hat on, but I really believe that it can be retained longer. Now, Angela Hewitt, our famous pianist here from Canada, she thinks she's starting to lose her perfect pitch. She's in her late 60s now, I think.
Oh,
Like
wow.
that freaks me out. I'm really upset that, but she says it's like a half tone. It's not like complete, but even that would frustrate me because it's
Well,
something I've
maybe it's
leaned on.
because
Maybe
it
my
could be
hearing will
two
go.
things.
Yeah.
It could be two things. It could be modern music sucks, and so there's no reason for the human brain to hear pitches anymore. Or B, I wonder if it's sort of like color blindness. Like some people lose their color vision in life. Like they're not born colorblind, but they lose it due to some event.
Oh, interesting.
I wonder if that's because, I mean, if you think about it, it's just the brain processing vibrations along the basilar membrane. And then there's a bundle of nerve fibers that go into your brain, and then your brain has to compute it and say, that's sound, that's not heat, that's not light. And so I guess if your brain is aging in such a way that neural connections are being maybe, changed
Pruned.
or something.
Isn't there pruning that
Pruned.
goes on?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
But I'd rather lose my sight than my hearing. Like, honestly.
That's what everybody who hears things really well, especially musicians, says that.
Mm.
And I totally understand where they're coming from on that. Like the sound experience is so rewarding. The visual one can give me headaches, but sounds rarely do.
So anyway, all I mean by not pathologizing it is encourage the kids that have gifting in that area, because I think it's going to be not necessarily their meal ticket, but it's going to definitely give them rewarding experiences. Choirs are really good for the autistic kids I've seen in choirs. They memorize the whole program. They don't need their music.
Yeah.
They coach other people. They help people when of course, they don't always want their mistakes pointed out, but they will point out, you sang a wrong note there. They're really valuable members of choirs, and it allows them to fit in a little less conspicuous way than in, say, in a rock band where you're out front and you're right. Not that some of them don't join rock bands, but choirs should be really encouraged. Mm-hmm. I think we've gotten away from part singing. They sort of yell now. I don't know if you've ever heard kids at school assemblies and stuff, but they're not taught how to phonate properly and the diaphragmatic breathing. So they're just in the throat, and it's just really harsh and ugly. Yeah. We need to go back to teaching singing. Mm-hmm. And I think some of these kids that don't fit in other things, like I wasn't a sports girl, I think now that I'm dyspraxic, so there was no way I could connect with the ball, and I was afraid of injuring my hands in volleyball, of course. I couldn't do the fitness tests. I wasn't a runner. I'm a distance swimmer. That's probably the one best individual sports. So you have to find what works for each child. Mm-hmm. And, if there's parents listening, keep trying, because they put me in the weirdest things. Baton twirling. No, sorry. It was cold. We did the Christmas parade one year. Oh, I didn't enjoy that. But I didn't know how to have a voice and request things that I would enjoy. So the piano lessons were the one thing that I quit for a while. And then I told my mom I wanted to go back and get my grade 8 piano. And she made me pay for it. And that was the way that was the incentive, right? So, but I never thought of being a musician or a music teacher in my youth. because I was so shy. So
But music is so valued and again can serve so many functions as you speak about. It could serve self-regulatory functions. It could serve, kind of social lubricant
it is.
functions.
It opens doors. Being a DJ helped me because I was speaking out into a void, right? You're not looking someone in the eye when you're announcing the songs. So it was a way of giving back, but it didn't cost me too much socially. Getting myself there and picking out the show material, that was the hard part. But once you're on the air and it's flowing, it's just beautiful. The other thing I see though is music therapy always seems to have these objectives. Like, why can't music just be for fun? Like, why does it have to have a life lesson or a social skill or whatever attached? So I thought of going into music therapy, but all of the internships were with big classrooms of children. And I thought, no, I have to do this one-on-one or just a couple of people. I knew that I wasn't, even before I was autistic, that I knew I was autistic, I knew that I couldn't teach a whole class, and it just seemed so rule-bound. I just, like, let's just get together and bang some pots and, I'll wear my ear defenders. And it doesn't have to be so goal-oriented. But that's just my pet peeve with music therapists. And boy, you can't elbow in on their territory. Like, they are certified, sort of like the autism specialists, right?
Yes. Right.
Don't you dare call yourself a music therapist. So that's a bit off-putting.
Yeah. Well, Christine, I'm thinking that we're going to have you back to talk about music because
I love it.
You're speaking to two musicians here, and
well, I tried to learn the bass during the lockdowns. Do you know who the Kruger brothers are? From
rings a bell.
North Carolina now. They're based there.
No, I don't.
They were mentored by Doc Watson.
Wow.
The famous folk.
Oh, sure. Singer. Yeah.
Yeah, look them up. Anyway, the bass player's from New York City, and he tried giving me a few bass lessons while we were all shut down. Joel, his name's Joel.
Yeah.
And very unusual that he ended up in a three-piece bluegrass group. Because I'm not a super bluegrass fan, but when I hear these guys play,
amazing.
Steve Martin gave them a big award. So he's got his own little group, right?
Yeah.
So look them up. Kruger spelled UEG, but sometimes it's abbreviated to just the U.
Certainly. Right.
I think you'll enjoy them.
Sounds good. That's going to be on my listen list for sure. For sure.
And if you want some of the articles that I mentioned, just ask me which ones you want the data for. You can put in the comments.
Yep. Sounds good. And we'll, of course, list, all the information that you sent us, and we could add. So even after some more resources become available, we can just add it to the webpage.
Yeah, we're just in this in-between time right now. We're awaiting peer review on phase 1. Phase 2 is being written up. And by the time this airs, phase 3 will be analyzed. So that's really exciting.
Sounds great. So Christine, thank you so much. This has been a wide-ranging discussion.
Yeah, I tend to be all over the map. So.
Yeah, but we're with you. We are with you.
You kept up.
I loved it. That's my kind of conversation.
And if you've got more resources, David, I've been on your page, but I don't know if you're writing another book or I can't read all the New York Times ones because there's a paywall. So maybe you can send me a few.
Oh, there is a paywall. You know what I should do is it's been enough years. Maybe I should just plagiarize my own stuff and put it on my website. But
I'd like
you're
to keep
welcome
in
to go
touch.
to the site.
Yeah,
let's do that, especially
because I have a lot of regrets in my life about relationships that I don't really want to get into now. But it's just, if I had known better, would I have done things differently? You beat yourself up with that, And I know when you were writing the book, you were trying to save your marriage when you were writing the book, and it's humorous, but there's also an undercurrent of sadness there, I'm sure, and missed opportunities, and I'll never know, But
right, and it is. I would like to keep in touch because there's only so much beating yourself up you can do before you realize that, that's not really serving me anymore. So I'm just going to move forward instead of regretting anything that ever happened. And
I don't have a life coach.
Forward.
I don't actually have a life coach right now. I haven't had any counseling in about, well, just because it was so expensive, probably about 10 years.
Yeah.
There's a Christian counseling center here. So I was using they had a sliding scale, which really helped. So anyway, you don't have to put any of this stuff in.
No, Kristen offered a sliding scale at one time, but she's now kind of packaging it differently. But it's not. It is a luxury that I have to be married to a life coach.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
well,
Christine.
good that you soldiered on and you made it. Like not everybody can salvage things, and hats off to you for doing that, because it gives us hope. Well, it gives us hope that a healthy relationship is possible, and that's what we need to see.
With effort
and not settling
and mindset. Yeah.
They call it breadcrumbing, not settling for people that toss you a crumb here and there, and that's supposed to keep you going.
Yeah. And that's what Kristen would not have done.
A lot of narcissists do that, right? And by the way, a lot of us who are more empathic are really drawn to those kind of people. They sort of sweep us off our feet. And
yes. Yeah. So. I'm incapable of sweeping anyone off their feet, and I know that Kristen would have left in 2 shakes had I not gotten my act together.
All right. Thanks a lot, both of you. It's delightful.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Take care.
Okay.
Bye
now.
Bye.